Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy, your favorite daily public policy podcast. I'm your host for the day, Amit Kumar, a researcher at the Takshashila Institution's Indo-Pacific Studies program. And the topic we'll explore and touch upon in today's episode relates to AI chips, especially the GPUs or graphics processing units as they are called. And to discuss this subject in detail, I have with me two very special guests, Ashwin Prasad and Satya Sahu. Ashwin is, of course, a research analyst with the institution's High Tech Geopolitics program. And Satya, as our listeners would recall, is a former colleague and also a former Takshashila researcher. Also used to work with the HTG program. The two have worked extensively on the topic and have come out with a very interesting paper on AI chips. The link to the paper is shared in the description, and I would strongly encourage our listeners to please peruse it. Welcome, Ashwin. Welcome, Satya.
Hey Amit,
Yeah.
thanks for having us.
Glad to have you all here. So I would like to begin with you, Ashwin. My first question to you when I look at the paper, a general question that I would have as a listener or a reader would be, why should we care about AI hardware at all?
Well, Amit, AI is pervasive today, as you might have noticed. It is one of those general purpose technologies that has an implication on how we do things across the board, right? You can draw parallels of AI with when computers were invented or when electricity was invented, and how these technologies sort of become a part of how processes or products or services, and they integrate into deeply into the whole ecosystem. And so AI is also one such general purpose technology, and it has a use case across all sectors of the economy. We have automotive driving and fraud detection and risk assessment in the field of finance. There is personalized ads. There are AI driven medicine and diagnostic facilities in healthcare, and there is also a strong AI applications in weaponry, in autonomous weapons and decision support systems and all that. And the list is basically endless. And when you're looking at such a huge AI boom, the projections are something, it's already, as of last year, it's worth 50 billion
Hmm.
estimated, and it's going to probably increase tenfold by as soon as 2030. And when we're thinking about something that is so much in focus and growing so fast, it is worth understanding how it works. And what few people realize is that while we see AI in the form of software, there is a very strong hardware component to it. When we talk about AI, we can talk about three pillars that make AI possible. On one hand, you have the AI algorithms, the so-called brains of the whole thing. But this brain functions on two other important pillars. One is data, which it uses to learn and then to process and give its outputs. And this interaction between data and algorithms happens on a foundation of hardware.
Right.
And that's where hardware comes in. And as our ambitions with AI grow, as the scope grows, and the hunger for AI applications continues to snowball into a massive avalanche that we're going to see in the coming years, we need to support all of this with hardware. And that is where AI chips come into focus. As much as AI is evolving, the hardware has also evolved a lot over the last few years. The hardware that we used to see before for the old AI applications are so different from what we see today. And so that is why I think it's worth discussing.
Quite fascinating. I mean, thing that you mentioned, it's a general purpose technology, and of a scale I think we haven't seen or witnessed in the past few decades now. Perhaps after electricity, any general purpose technology of this scale, which would have this pervasive an effect on our almost every aspect of our lives, right? From medical to computing to other lifestyle products, etc. So yeah, something quite fascinating, right? Okay, and towards the end of your answer, you said this is why, because of this nature of uh, AI as a general purpose technology, the chips become important, right? So, Satya, let me turn to you, right? What do we mean by when we use the term AI chip ecosystem? For the interest of our listeners, could you please very broadly outline as to what it entails?
Right. So, more accurately term it is an AI hardware ecosystem, and chips are usually the most prominent part of it. But the other segments, the other things that go into this are equally, if sometimes not more important. But I will start off with very broadly, processors or accelerators, the memory and storage, and finally networking or interconnect technology. Those are the three main segments, and then there's the software stack on top of it, which we'll discuss later, I suppose. But anyway, so very broadly, in order to run the algorithms or process the data, just crunch the numbers, right? There's a lot of matrix processing and convolutions that need to happen to be able to run any, your chat GPT or Claude or, on your phone, like Galaxy AI or Apple Intelligence. You need to be able to crunch those, the calculations. For that, you need processing units or accelerators. And broadly, there are, I would say, four kinds of processing units. There are other like bespoke kinds as well. But we'll start off with CPUs, which are central processing units. These are the things that we grew up learning about in school, right? And we were often told that the whole the PC cabinet is a CPU, which is somewhat of a misnomer. The CPU is a very small chip inside it, and this is what your usual Intel, AMD, produce that you see on laptops all the time. Now, these are general purpose accelerators, right? They can handle a wide range of tasks from making your MS Paint to all the way to running in AI workloads as well. Now, they are part of any computing and consumer electronics like PCs, smartphones, laptops, even other dedicated things like an ATM machine or something like that, right? So that is also has a CPU inside it, along other things. So they're flexible and easy to program, primarily because they are run by something called, a very standardized instruction set architecture, something that Intel and AMD have a monopoly on, called an x86, or in the case of your smartphones, something called ARM. So this means that the software, the instructions, the basic instructions that software developers need to tailor their applications for is already established. So it's pretty easy to program, and it's easy to tap into the whole developer ecosystem there. So, but however, the problem is for AI focused applications, they're not very good in terms of optimal performance and power efficiency. They're not great. So recently, I've seen that some CPUs have begun dedicating a part of their space of the silicon to something called a neural processing unit. So that is where you have a lot of this AI workloads running locally right now. Then more prominently, we have something called GPUs, which are graphics processing units. The best way to term this would be if you think of CPUs as executing tasks one by one sequentially, graphics processing units run simpler tasks or divide a complex task into simpler units and work on them parallelly, like thousands and thousands of them. So they're parallel processing, right? So these were initially developed for gaming or computer rendering, computer graphics. All the animated movies that we see in the theaters as well. However, that same pipeline, same work pipeline, is also very useful for tackling AI workloads. So what ended up happening was that, as we'll discuss later as well, is that NVIDIA, for instance, which was already a very successful GPU manufacturer for gaming, pivoted to making a more general purpose environment through which software developers can program GPUs for handling tasks like this. Right. So that is why we see GPUs as a de facto processing unit for AI workloads right now. And then we have more specifically ASICs, which are application specific integrated circuits. Think of them are very custom chips meant for very specific workloads and made by very specific companies only. They kind of can be x86 based, they can be ARM based, depending on the needs of the manufacturer, right? So, and this is where we see Google's TPU, the tensor processing unit, or Amazon and Facebook developing their own processors for their own servers, where they deploy their own, AI algorithms on top of it. So you can't; these are not very easily customizable or versatile. So unless you have a workload that benefits specifically from this custom-made chip, people don't usually invest in this. They're very, very expensive to make, to design, but they are very, performant because we're tailor making them for a very specific kind of workload, right? And finally, you have something called field programmable gate arrays, FPGAs, which is what Ashwin mentioned. Usually go into very specific devices like military, weapons and decision-making systems, because they're reconfigurable circuits. So after you design and manufacture them, you can alter the way those circuits are configured to do something a completely different task altogether. So again, so this does make them very expensive. And the best thing about them in the context of AI workloads would be that for prototyping or training or experimenting, they're an excellent option, right? But again, it's not very easy to produce them or market them.
Okay. Let me know if I got this correct. So what you're saying is CPUs, the traditional processors that we find in our laptops, computer, etc. They are not when it comes to processing huge amount of data, especially when AI data, AI computing, and machine learning is involved. They are not the ones which are the preferred commodity, and GPUs are the ones which would be uh, the primary preferred option that a company or a country would take. Is that it?
Yes, as of now, GPUs vastly exceed CPUs in their capabilities. They also do so in terms of power consumption. So again, depending on a particular entity's firms or individuals' requirements, they may choose to run. If it's a small model that can be run on a laptop itself, and you're using it for your own internal purpose, you can run it on one of the newer CPUs, right? That come equipped with an NPU. But for fielding it on the cloud for an AI application, for instance, Swiggy or Zomato need to run Chat GPT based services to for the customer support. For that, Chat GPT cannot rely on CPUs. They need to run on like large, vast farms of GPUs to be able to service this in client requests.
Okay, so having established the fact that GPUs are central to machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing, Ashwin, I want to turn to you and ask, what does the current landscape of the GPU supply chain look like? Who are the dominant players? Who are the dominant countries? Which are the countries which are leading in this experiment and in mastering AI technologies? And what does this supply chain and the uh, GPU supply chain landscape look like at this moment?
There is significant market concentration in the GPU market, and it's a strong monopoly by one firm, NVIDIA. We must have all heard of NVIDIA as the GPU company that has, become so valuable these days. They recently overtook Apple as the most valuable company in the world, and this is driven by the demand for AI. So, as Satya mentioned, were they were making chips for GPUs for gaming and computer generated imagery. But when AI applications and like massive matrix multiplications became paramount for AI development, GPUs Nvidia started to pivot their GPUs for AI applications, and they have been used across the board. For instance, the Chat GPT 3, which we will all be familiar with, was trained on NVIDIA V100 GPUs. They have NVIDIA has a monopoly in the GPU market. They have captured almost all of the market share, and AMD is a distant second in this market landscape. And so this is something that is worth being concerned about. And so while Intel also makes GPUs of its own, Intel the popular CPU manufacturer, but they're a very, very minor player compared to the market share that Nvidia has. And you Nvidia, though it is a major maker of GPUs, they are something what we call as a fabless company. So they design the GPU, but they don't make them on their own.
Right.
They outsource the fabrication part or the process, the manufacturing part of the GPUs to other companies, and this is where TSMC in Taiwan is crucial.
Right.
They are they are at the cutting edge of semiconductor manufacturing, and they are the main fabricators for NVIDIA's GPU market. So there is as you can see, there is a lot of bottlenecks in the supply chain of GPUs, because one, it is coming from one major firm, which is Nvidia, and this is again geographically concentrated at the hands of TSMC, which is making most of their chips. So and this is a cause for concern for India also, because we have something called the India AI mission, and out of the 10,000 crores budget outlay, over half of it, nearly half of that budget outlay has been allocated to purchasing GPUs. And if we are talking GPUs, then a lot of it is most likely going to be NVIDIA.
Right.
And are we ready to, create such a huge dependency on one company and one geography for our? Should we target more resilience? These are all questions worth thinking about.
Obviously worth questioning these facts and how it looks at this moment. But and in economic policy, we always talk about these kind of things where monopoly develops and how it is it breeds it stifles competition, and then it becomes a problem for the economy as a whole and creates a whole lot of risk and vulnerabilities, right? But if that's the case, my question, next logical question that I would have is, if that's the case and Nvidia is so dominant, what makes Nvidia so dominant in this field? And why don't we see any other players emerging this in this particular field when it comes to GPUs? Any one of you, if you would like to take this question up, Satya?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. So Nvidia at the start of the millennium was the first one to develop or to coin the moniker graphics processing unit, right? So at that time, even in the gaming and the graphics rendering space, Nvidia is beginning to become fairly prominent. But they soon reached, I think, so at that point, graphics processing and GPUs are pretty difficult to program still, because as I mentioned, there are thousands of processors within it, all of which handle simpler parallelized tasks, right? So the problem was to program every single part of this processor itself. So what NVIDIA did to address this problem was create a chip design architecture called CUDA, which also is the name of its software development platform. I will come to that later. But when they designed this architecture, they basically made it so that it could be very easily programmed by a C based language, programming language, right? So, what this meant was they could attract developers by advertising the massive parallel computing power of that GPUs have for a lot of scientific computing tasks, which at the time was very time consuming to to undertake, or would require the help of supercomputers. So what Nvidia did was very clever. Actually, they invested very a long time and effort into this and money. They went to universities and research centers and convinced students, researchers, and academicians to leverage their GPUs. They gave away GPUs for free, by the way, to these places. And also taught them how and trained them how to use CUDA, which was very simple at the time. So on one end, they made sure the supply was ready. On the other end, on the demand side, they made sure that the tech, went to companies, to any place where scientific computing or any sort of parallel computing tasks were needed, and basically sold them the promise of NVIDIA hardware, GPUs, and CUDA software to be able to leverage that power for their industrial work. So once the market was developed, the moment the industry started looking for people who are well versed in CUDA, they already had a very supply side, ready, right? So you had universities churning out students who were familiar with how to use CUDA and using NVIDIA hardware to then be absorbed by the workforce. So over time. Besides this, of course, NVIDIA did improve a lot on the capabilities of its GPUs since 2010, 2006 actually. But I think by 2016, with their Pascal architecture, NVIDIA really began, being the choice for AI, neural processing, machine learning tasks, right? So I'll stop here, but yeah, essentially, I think CUDA is the moat. CUDA, by the way, stands for Common Unified Development Architecture. So I think this is the primary reason why NVIDIA's monopoly is very difficult to break and why it has stood the test of time for so long.
Yeah, my 2 cents with my very limited knowledge would be that there are just too few companies who are leading or are competing in this race to master the chip technology, and each of them have their own respective specializations. Like ARM would specialize in the chips that are used in smartphones, or Intel has developed special capabilities in 86 architecture and other memory chips, and Nvidia is something which it has specialized gotten a specialization in these things. Maybe we need more companies and more startups working on these. Of course, these are quite costly and might be a hindrance for early entrants into this field, but something which we require, right? So, Ashwin, let me come to you now. With this, given the kind of the supply chain or the dominance that we just discussed about Nvidia, and I'm sure because this is a vulnerability or the dependence on American chips is vulnerability, strategic vulnerability, especially for a country like China, right? And it with announcing missions like self-sufficiency in things like AI and stuff, uh, China must be concerned about this, right? So where do we find China in this game? Of course, China is playing a catch-up game with the US, but are there any Chinese alternatives to NVIDIA's GPUs, or how much of a capability does the Chinese have at this point of time?
I would say at the cutting edge, it is American companies and American firms continue to dominate. China is definitely trying to develop some alternatives to, TSMC, for instance. They're trying to develop fabrication technologies of their own. And for instance, ASICs, which is another accelerator, which serves as an alternative to GPU and CPU. There, the market landscape is more diverse, and there are more firms, and there are many Chinese firms as well that are trying to develop solutions for AI use cases. And so China is not close to bridging the gap with Nvidia or TSMC for. But what they do have going in their favor is that the AI chip market is not just dependent on the processing units. There are memory systems, there are interconnects, and these components become as important as the main processing unit for the functioning of the AI. You might have the most powerful accelerator, but if you don't have the storage that can support the necessary speeds you need to run that processor at its optimal uh, performance, then you're not going to get the advantages out of it, right? So in some of these areas, China has some say in the market landscape, and so that is how they are able to still stay in the game.
So does Nvidia use Chinese components in its GPUs?
uh, in GPUs, no, because the GPUs are fabricated by TSMC.
Right.
But there are like memory systems, there are interconnects where there are
Oh,
some Chinese firms may find some uses.
right. Satya?
I don't think NVIDIA can stand to use Chinese components right now. So, in terms of memory, as far as NVIDIA's latest GPUs are concerned, HBM3 and HBM3 memory, only Korea's SK Hynix and well Samsung before that have the capacity to to even make this, to fabricate this extremely advanced memory systems in the first place. Um, China's YMTC, I forgot the Yangtze Memory Technology
Yeah,
Corporation,
young.
used to have the capability to produce these. Maybe HBM and HBM2, the earlier specifications of the standard, not anymore. I think as far as the more advanced revisions of this is concerned. However, I think given the export controls that the US has instituted upon China and is probably going to expand a lot more, fabricating any of the leading edge advanced AI processors is extremely difficult for China to do going forward. You'll have a lot of news items coming out saying that China has made breakthroughs, etc., in 7 nm plus accelerators, maybe providing competition to Nvidia. Again, but being able to make a proof of concept and being able to make them at scale, being leveraged across businesses is very different. And even prototyping is, see, you can possibly create an alternative to Nvidia's older GPUs, like 5 years, 6 years ago, that a Turing architecture. Maybe a facsimile of that can be made, but without the software ecosystem on top of it, you'll be stuck in the water as well. It's very difficult to program that without having this developer buy-in. So even if China does end up making something like this, it's still going to be a very very tough road ahead for them to get to the same playing field. The other point, which is more likely, is that China will continue to get, maybe it's not like all GPUs are banned from being exported to China, right? Some consumer level GPUs, etc., can also be gotten right now, or some integrated GPUs from past part of systems can also be sent out. The problem is, while you can still leverage these, this will lack some capabilities that the leading edge AI processors will have. So China can end up using this. A lot of firms already do in India, for instance, bootstrapped startup or something. Or more likely, what is going to happen is you see a lot of companies, shell companies, etc., smuggle these GPUs and other units into China through fronts. It will be a cat and mouse game for a long time.
Yeah, and US has actively blocked the Chinese from developing and advancing in these fields, right? YMTC that Satya mentioned actually suffered from sanctions, and otherwise they would have continued to be in the high bandwidth memory market. And these sanctions have continued across regimes. It's not that when the Democrats came to power, these were loosened or anything. So there is a continued resolve in among the American political leadership to across the aisle to keep the moat and maintain it. And they seem to have a common aim and objective in keeping Chinese out
Right.
of the semiconductor supply chain. So
Right, and only one leverage that I could think of from China's perspective is, and something which is also talked about a lot, is China's market, right? And because Nvidia, and we saw this play out between and the Nvidia CEO and the U.S. administration when Nvidia was not allowed to sell a lot of its chips to China, because China is the largest market for Nvidia, and a huge amount of its profits and revenues are generated from Chinese market, right? So this play out, right? And so this gives China some sort of a leverage in using its market as a tool of economic coercion. But on that, my opinion has been that if China indeed chooses to leverage its market and to resort to economic coercion uh, with American companies or Nvidia, it would end up hurting itself, right, in the end, because you would not only will you lose access to those chips, you'll also get behind the other companies which rely on those chips to process faster and compete with other companies. They'll also get behind, right? And you don't have any clear alternatives to replace those chips. So this is something which might also hurt if China chooses to go down this path. It might hurt itself, right? Last question before we finish this off. Uh, Trump has won elections, the presidency election in the US. He's going to be the next US president starting January 2025. Uh, Given his election campaign, where he promised that he'll slap 20% tariff across the board on all countries and 60% on China, and given a lot of these companies have their operating factories and research centers in countries like India, Taiwan, South Korea, etc., how is this gonna impact the entire ecosystem? And this is in a way, I mean, the idea here is for Trump to get manufacturing jobs back in America, but this is gonna make it difficult for even for the Americans. From it lead to cost escalation and trigger a whole cascading effect throughout the world, right? What are your thoughts?
specific to the semiconductor industry and AI chips in specific, I think the landscape is going to remain more or less the same. There is definitely not going to be any loosening of the sanctions and helping free trade with China of any sort. It's going to continue, and if we might only see more tightening if there is ever a call for it. And Trump is always going to look at reciprocal trade, and he's going to think about, and he is like I said, like when even before Biden came to power, he had imposed some sanctions on China, which the Biden administration decided to continue.
Right.
And so it only makes logical sense that Trump will keep those up, and things are going to stay on the trade front with China, especially things are going to stay the same.
Yeah. So
Um,
my question is, like, just because before you come in, so one of the advantages that the US has in this game, or this competition with China, is its alliances. Yeah, right. The US and its system of alliances, allies and partners, something which China lacks, and the semiconductor ecosystem is something, or the chip ecosystem is something where uh, US has leveraged this partnership and alliance a lot, which has brought the cost, distributed the cost quite fairly among all its allies and partners, right? And which has paid dividends over a period of time, right? Something which China lacks. China has to do all of it, all of this on its own, right? But when you become transactional, as as everyone suspects, when Trump comes to power next year, and when you become transactional and you start forcing your alliance countries, allies and partners to shift some of the operations back to US, this is going to undermine the benefits of the whole US system of alliances and partnerships, right? And this might, I mean, I don't know, I don't think it would be enough, but might give some uh, uh, respite to the Chinese competitors. Would you think so?
See, it would give respect to Chinese competitors if Chinese competitors they had the same ish capabilities as the affected players elsewhere in the world were. That's not true. So I don't think on this front Chinese competitors are not going to get a huge opening. But think about it this way: tariffs would work if the levine country had some market power here, and while the US does have market power in the sense that, or as well as geopolitical power in the sense that the equipment, the technologies, and the materials that are used to make the semiconductors, and the design workforce needed to provide services to the manufacturing industry are based in the US, and the US retains controls on the patents and other intellectual property as well. However, since you are getting 90% of your advanced chips from Taiwan itself, from TSMC, levying tariffs is simply just going to pass on the costs to your domestic American consumers. But the greater problem for the rest of the world is that these costs will be sticky. These costs will stick to the to any country that wishes to procure these chips or the associated hardware. This cost will be shared with them as well. Now this is where even, for instance, let's say a low income country wishes to get something for its AI infrastructure, or decides to, let's say, buy networking or interconnect technology for its data centers, it's more likely going to go towards Chinese suppliers of this products than any of the US's allies, because the costs associated will be lower, right? And this is where I think is a huge problem that can be solved by any manner of means, but not efficiently, right? So I would say, as of now, this is the most speculation we can make on this area.
Okay. Oh, well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Satya and Ashwin. Thank you so much for joining us and discussing and uh, giving us these much food for thought and a lot of primer about AI hardware system and the chip ecosystem, right? Thank you so much for coming and joining us. And to our listeners, do tune in to our other episodes of All Things Policy. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Amit. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Amit.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.